Cheers. Should have done that before going on air, I suppose, but there you go. It's Troy. Welcome to another live stream on my channel. Cheers. And I've got feedback again, so I'm just going to stop. Hold on one second. Should have done that before going on air, I suppose, but there you go. Sorry about that. I have to make sure that I've got YouTube turned off on my other browser, because otherwise it causes interference and I get feedback. Anyway, that's sorted now. So welcome to the broadcast. So today, as you see from the title, I'm going to talk about the truth about incels. But before I do, just a couple of parish notices, I suppose. Now, my bundle of 10 books about dating, which is called Renegade Dating Blueprint, that is being discontinued, guys, at the end of the year to make way for some other content that I'm doing, some other products that I'm going to be putting out. So if you want to get hold of that, and I highly recommend you do, because it's awesome. I say it myself. It's got books in it like How to Be an Arsehole, 7 Laws of Seduction, Still in the Game, Text Game Mastery, loads and loads of great advice, 15 years worth of game and dating advice packed into one bundle. You can still get that for $39. So grab it now while you can. It's worth about $250. The link's below. Get on board, because it will be taken down at the end of this year to make way for bigger and better things. Get on my email list. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, the YouTube channel, please do subscribe. It really helps me to gain a bigger audience to keep doing this. You can also support me on Patreon. The Patreon link is also below. Okay, so look, let's, without further ado, get into it. I'm just trying to get comfortable here because like the angle's a bit weird. I see bootleg versions of your books. Yeah, I mean, you know, that it's going to happen. It happens to everyone. It's just the way it is. I think the usual advice that people give about that is the people that get hold of the bootleg versions, they're probably unlikely to have actually paid for your content anyway. So you're not really missing out. And if anything, in a sense, bootleg copies of your books sort of do you a favor in a strange way, because it means that the word is being spread to people who wouldn't necessarily have paid. But if they like the content, then it might be that they sort of become, you know, a part of the audience, and they pay for something else further down the line. So it is what it is. There's not a great deal that I can do about that. But I hope that people enjoy the books when they get hold of them. I prefer it if they pay, but if they don't, that's just the way of the world, really. So do I go after them? No, not really. I just think it's, I just haven't got time. Do you know what I mean? I don't even know the numbers involved. I don't think it's big enough of a deal really to do that. Are your books going to go audio anytime soon? Yes. I mean, audio books, I'm 100% on board. I listen to audiobooks now myself. I'm a big fan. I'm going to start putting my stuff out on audio. So watch this space into 2020 for new content. I am definitely going to be looking at doing audio. And then Alex Schmidt says, would you say there's a difference between incels and virgins? Is there much difference then from now than in the past? Yeah, well, that's kind of what I'm going to talk about, actually, because I was what you would now call an incel, I guess, when I was in my late teens. That light's a bit annoying, isn't it? Maybe that's better. I don't know. I was kind of an incel, really, when I was younger, or what you would call an incel. So in my late teens to basically when I was 20. So I didn't lose my V card until I was 20 years old. And there were a number of reasons for that, which I'll go into in the course of this stream. But the reason that I thought I'd talk about this today is because I feel like I've got some personal experience to bring to bear on this. And I feel like if it can help anybody, if I just talk a bit about my experience with inceldom, if you like, and Alex is right, it wasn't called that back in the day. That's a relatively new term. Then perhaps that will just, you know, if you're struggling with this, or if you know someone that is, or whatever, maybe it's just going to help a little bit. And it's kind of an interesting topic to talk about, because these days, this word incel, we hear it all the time. And it tends to be talked about somewhat negatively in the mainstream because, as we all know, it's linked with some pretty horrific incidents involving shootings and so on and so forth. Now, I don't really intend to get into that side of things today. That's not what this conversation is about. What I'm talking about here is basically the condition of the guy who is unable to, to find somebody to have sex with, basically, and whether that's a real thing or not, and what he might be able to do about it, and also some of my experiences related to that. I mean, my feeling on the sort of the wider political implications of it is there have been a few incidents, yes, where I mean, obviously Elliot Rodgers is a famous one, where inceldom, if you like, has been connected with a horrific event, and that's a terrible, terrible thing. And yeah, that's not really something that I want to talk about today, because I see that as being slightly separate, because clearly, as horrific and terrible as those events are, we are talking about a minority, an extremely small minority of people where that ends up happening. And I'm talking about a more general experience. I'm not talking about people who were perhaps psychopathic or had tendencies towards, committing violent acts anyway. So just to sort of get that out of the way. I would say, though, that I suspect that the term, well, I don't suspect, I mean, I think it's kind of pretty obvious that the term incel has been politicized to some extent by the mainstream. So now that the term is known to people in the mainstream who perhaps don't understand or aren't really fully aware of the extent of the whole men's online space, it's become a sort of a convenient insult just to call somebody an incel. So the person might be a dating coach, and he gets called an incel. And I mean, it's ridiculous because clearly the guy's not an incel. But from a mainstream perspective, they understand enough about the jargon to know that that's kind of an insult that they can throw. And generally speaking, they'll relate it to somebody who is potentially going to be violent or hates women, or is disrespectful towards women. And actually, I think we should cover misogyny as well in this, because I think this whole thing about hating women is, for a start, I think it's ridiculous. I don't think if you hate women, you commit a logical fallacy if you hate women, and you're also probably a pretty lousy human being as well, because why would you hate half the population? But if you come to material about dating, about intergender dynamics, and that causes you to hate women, then really you've drawn the wrong conclusion from that material, and really you need to go back to the drawing boards and reconsider your premises, because what you shouldn't be doing is looking at that material and thinking, I now despise half the population. What you should be doing instead is looking at that material and saying, okay, I understand this has given me some insight into the way in which relationships work, into the way that the genders kind of come together or come apart. I'm now going to use that information to ensure that I have a good life. What you shouldn't be doing, in my opinion, is saying, okay, well, as a result of reading this information, I now hate all women. I don't think that is a logical way to proceed. And more than that, I don't think it's a healthy way to proceed. I don't think it's a healthy way for you as the individual to proceed, because you're just going to get knotted up in resentment and anger. And that will lead you down a dark route. And I'm not saying it will lead you down a homicidal route, but it certainly won't lead you down a route that's going to be very conducive to your mental well-being and personal development, if you like. But anyway, putting all the sort of the dark side of things aside and just concentrating more on the issue of guys, because it is predominantly guys who are incels or involuntary celibates. So just in case anybody's watching this and they don't know what the hell I'm talking about, just to define the term, incel is a shortening or abbreviation for involuntary celibate. And the idea is that this is a guy, usually a pretty young guy, but it doesn't have to be, I guess, who would ideally like to be engaging in sexual relations with maybe a specific woman, or maybe just, a woman. And he's unable to do so because he can't get anybody to accept his sexual advances, let's say. I think that's probably the neatest way of putting it. If anybody in the chat has a better sort of definition, then please enlighten us. But I think that's a pretty comprehensive way of stating it. It's somebody who would like to be having sex and who isn't having sex. And the reason the person isn't having sex is because they can't get anybody to have sex with them. You know, nobody's interested, or that's how it appears to them. So in answer to Alex's question, is there a difference between incels and virgins? There is a difference, yes, because somebody who's a virgin is not necessarily an incel. Somebody who's a virgin is just somebody who hasn't had sex yet. So you could be a Chad. You could be, you know, I mean, there was a time when Brad Pitt hadn't had sex yet, and Brad Pitt is not an incel, has never been an incel. So it's an issue of timeline, I think. What you're talking about there. Everyone is a virgin until they first have sex. Some people transition from, I don't mean transition like that. Some people transition from being a virgin to being somebody who has sex pretty seamlessly. It happens for them fairly easily. It's not really a big deal. And those tend to be, being stereotypical about it, those tend to be the kind of Chad guys at school, the jocks, the good looking, the popular guys, etc., etc. Those guys, the transition from virgin to guy who's now getting laid is, you know, it's not a big deal. For the incel, it's an incredibly big deal, and it might be insurmountable. That is to say, they might not be able to find anybody within their social circle or their grouping or their town or their state or whatever who will have sex with them, and therefore they are stuck in this involuntary stasis of being sexless. And so what they do is they go online and they join Reddit and they go onto forums and they identify as incels. They say that, and they will talk to other guys online. They'll complain about women. They'll complain about the sexual marketplace. They'll complain about dating apps, about the culture in general, and they will say, my life is terrible. My life is not worth living in some cases because I am an incel, and this is a condition that I would seek to change. This is something that I don't want this to be the case, but it is, and I can't do anything about it. And so, you know, and when they take it to an extreme, some of these guys, it becomes their whole identity. Their whole identity is inceldom. That becomes the most important part of them, which is an odd thing when you think about it. It's strange to base your whole identity on not being able to do something. It's as if I base my whole identity on not being able to ride a horse. You know what I mean? Like I can't ride a horse. So it's a bit like if I set up a Reddit, subreddit to talk about people who can't ride horses, and we're identified as, I don't know, non-equines or something. It's like, oh my God, the non-equine community, it's great we're all here to support each other because, you know, all these people out there that can ride horses, they don't understand us non-equines. They don't know the pain that we go through. Not being able to ride a horse. What can I do? My life is ruined. Yeah, silly example. But you know what I'm saying? It's kind of strange to base your identity on a negation, but that's really what incels do. And as I say, really, I was one of them. Really, I could have, if the internet had been invented when I was a kid, if forums had been invented when I was younger, I could have been one of these guys. As it was, the term incel hadn't been invented. I don't know when it was invented. I would guess in the 2010s sometime, maybe I don't want to say now because somebody will correct me, but maybe 2015 or maybe perhaps it was earlier than that. But I think it was certainly in the last decade or so that the term incel was coined. But incels definitely existed before that, you know, without a doubt. I mean, the classic guy who can't get laid, if you like, you know, if you watch high school movies, if you read books, if you watch, sitcoms and things like that, it's a caricature in fiction, but it's a very, very real thing. And Patrick Jones has just said, it's very hard, near impossible, in fact, for anyone non-incel to relate to inceldom. Yeah, you know, I think that's probably true. And as I'm sort of coming around to explain, I would say that I was one of that number. Now, that didn't continue, as you'll know, because obviously I've made a whole, you know, I've written 11 books about being a player. So obviously my inceldom came to an abrupt halt when I was about 20. But before then, I was. Now, let me explain what happened. And I kind of touched on this yesterday, really, in the stream that I did yesterday. when I was talking about my early experiences with girls, and I was talking about one-itis, and I was talking about getting into the friend zone. Basically, that's what would happen to me when I was a kid. And I'm talking here 15, 16, 17, 15 to 20, basically, when I was sexually interested, when, you know, people were dating around me and I wasn't dating. I did actually date, sort of. There's a couple of experiences, maybe I'll tell them in a minute, where I kind of went out with girls, but nothing happened. And the reason, really looking back, that I remained a virgin, it was a number of things to put together. So let's go through them. The first one was, and the main one was, I would get into the friend zone. I would get one-itis for girls who weren't interested in me. So I talked yesterday about a girl called Ellie, who I was at school with in my English class. Now with Ellie, I had a big one-itis for her. And again, that term hadn't been invented when I was that age. We would call it unrequited love, I suppose. I had a massive one-itis for this girl, Ellie, that lasted for several years. And actually, during that period, I got attention from other girls. There were other girls who were interested in me. I can think of two at least. Actually, kind of a third as well. During that period of a couple of years when I was obsessed with Ellie, who were interested in me and who made their interest in me known. Now, a couple of things here. I held off from doing anything with them. I held off from trying to push the thing forward with any of those girls because I was so focused on Ellie, and I thought, I can't do anything with these other girls, because if I did, then what if Ellie found out? She would, you know, that would just ruin my chances. And, you know, yesterday in English class, she smiled at me. So, you know, it looks like finally I'm getting somewhere. And if I did anything with this other girl who's in the class, where's that going to leave me? It's going to ruin everything. So that was one reason. Now, of course, now when we look at it from a, you know, from a dating skills perspective, you can see that actually perhaps it would have been a good idea for me to have gone on some dates with one of these other girls, because in all likelihood, Ellie would have then become jealous. You know, she might have seen my sexual market value as being higher than she saw it initially, because she would think, well, hang on a minute, these other girls are interested in him. There must be something about him. And perhaps that would have pushed her towards me. So maybe I missed a trick there, but that was, you know, at the time, because of lack of experience and lack of any information like we have now on this channel and other people's channels and everything else. That just didn't occur to me. You know, I didn't think about, and also I suppose as well, I was a bit of a nice guy in a way, or an aspiring nice guy. And I think I would have been resistant to the idea of playing games, as you might call it, in order to manipulate. I don't want to say manipulate. You know what I mean? I think I would have been resistant, because I believed in sort of the purity of love and everything. I perhaps would have been somewhat resistant to dating somebody else with a view to changing the first girl's mind. But the other thing was, because my one-itis was so strong for Ellie, I just wasn't really attracted to these other girls. Now, actually, as it was, with the benefit of hindsight, they were, as I say, there were about three, I think. They were pretty attractive, really. And the mistake I made, which is a mistake that I would now counsel any clients that I work with, I would counsel strongly against this. The mistake that I made was to focus on one girl who wasn't interested in me, to the detriment of other girls who were actually pretty attractive, who were. And there's the old phrase, you know, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. And that is kind of true. It's kind of true for dating, you know? I mean, you can't, as we all know, you can't force somebody to like you. You can't force somebody to be attracted to you. All you can really do is present yourself in the most favorable light possible, put the opportunity in front of them. And then if they don't take it, if they're not interested in you in that way, then at some point you have to say, okay, fine, I put my hands up, I'm going to move on to somebody else. Now, what I should have done back in those school days was to say, okay, well, look, I mean, it's pretty clear that nothing's going to happen with Ellie. She's not interested in me. That's just the way it is. So instead, I've seen some interest from this girl over here. I'm going to go and talk to her and maybe take her on a date and whatever. But I didn't do that. And as I said, that's partly because the one-itis was so strong for Ellie, that it sort of blotted out my attraction for these other girls, and because I didn't want to upset Ellie and then risk losing the great prize of getting with this one girl, Ellie. The other thing is that, and this is key in terms of learning about dating skills, game, whatever you want to call it. The other thing was that I didn't know how to escalate. I had no idea how to move an interaction with a girl forward. So both with Ellie, but also with these other girls, I was completely passive in these situations because I had no clue what to do to move things forward, right? So I had no idea. Even if a girl was interested in me, that was great. I was aware of it. I chat to her and everything, but I didn't know what you did in order to make something happen. And this came to the stage when, on one occasion, this was somewhat after Ellie, I ended up with a girl in my bed when I was about 17, I think. And we'd been out in London. We came back. She was in my bed. And nothing happened. And I think the reason nothing happened was because I was just clueless in terms of escalation, in terms of moving things forward. Okay. So a couple of things there. There's one-itis, and then there was my inability to be effective in a dating situation, if you like. So those are the two reasons initially. So here's the thing, right? So those are the real reasons. But then when I look back on it, I think about the stories that I was telling myself in my head. And the narratives that I was creating for myself in my head were effectively incel narratives. So what I was telling myself in my head was, and guys, make no mistake, I've lurked on some incel forums. I've read some of the posts, and I know the kinds of things that some of these guys said. And they really resonated with me because I was saying similar things to myself when I was 17, when I was 16, 17, 18. I was saying things to myself like, I am unlovable. I will never find anybody. I am almost subhuman. I'm so ugly that nobody will ever be attracted to me. I am somehow subhuman in a sense. And for that reason, I will never find physical love. I will never be loved in a romantic or sexual way by a woman. And as a result of that, my genes will be eradicated from the human race, and rightly so, because if I am a worthless human being, what right can I possibly have to do the normal things that everyone else or a lot of other people do and procreate and everything else? That was the narrative that I was telling myself. Actually, it wasn't true because, as I said, the truth is there were other girls who were interested in me. It was just the one or two one-itis ones that I really liked weren't. So instead of being sort of pragmatic about it, and instead of cutting my losses with Ellie or whoever I had one-itis with at the time and dating somebody else, I preferred to tell myself that narrative that I was this subhuman person who was somehow marked out by God. Or not necessarily a religious God, but you know what I mean, marked out by the universe as being unworthy of procreation, of being unworthy of human affection. And here's the thing, right? Why did I do that? Why did I tell myself that narrative? Well, partly because I'm a bit of a fucking weirdo, and it kind of, but more than that, because I kind of enjoyed it. That's the reality of it. And that's bringing this back around to 2019's incels. And I'll get flamed for this, of course. And I don't mean this universally, but I know for myself, when I was thinking those sorts of thoughts, I was kind of getting off on it. I don't know if anyone can identify with that. I don't know if anyone can relate to that. But here's the thing, right? I was sitting there and I was thinking all of those things. And it made me feel special in a funny kind of perverse way. It made me feel different to other people. Suddenly, here was a way in which I was marked out from other people. I actually remember my father saying to me when I was a kid, when I was really young, my dad said to me once, you just don't, this wasn't connected with this incel thing, by the way, this was something else. But he said to me, you don't like being just one of the crowd, do you? You don't like being just one of a normal guy amongst other normal people. You want to be something special. And if you can't be the best, you want to be the worst. You want to be vermin under people's shoes. Do you know what I mean? You want to be the devil, or you want to be, you know, the Messiah. You don't want to be anything in between. And in a sense, he was right. And that's kind of what I was doing with this inceldom narrative that I was building. Rather than just accept and say, okay, do you know what? I'm a pretty average dude. I tried it with this girl. She doesn't really like me. I guess that's just the way it goes. Better luck next time. I'll ask somebody else out on a date instead. For some psychological reason, and I mean, we can speculate on why it is, but it's not really very important. I preferred to cast myself in a semi-heroic role where instead of just saying, okay, well, maybe I'm an average dude and, you know, she just preferred the class Chad. Instead, I would create this almost fantasy that I was special because I was so below the rest of humanity that I was almost, you know, as I say, subhuman. Subhuman is a term that I used to use against myself when I was that age. Can you imagine that? And it's funny when you see people on self-help sort of channels, when you see people talking about, you know, the way that we talk to ourselves is so important. And I mean, the way that I spoke to myself then and the way that I've spoken to myself in various situations throughout my life, absolutely appalling. You would never treat a friend like that. You would never say to a friend, if a friend came to you and said, yeah, I really fancy this girl in class, but I don't think she's really interested. You wouldn't say to that guy, yes, that's because you're subhuman vermin and you will never be loved by a woman on this for your entire time on this planet. You know, that would be absolutely terrible. You wouldn't do that. And yet I felt that it was acceptable to treat myself like that. But as I say, the reason really is because I was getting off on it. I was getting off on the fact that I was making a drama out of what was actually a pretty mundane event, which is getting blown out by some girl in your class. I mean, that happens probably to most guys at one time or another. But I was unable to just accept it as just one of those things that happened. And I wanted to create a story around it where I was the hero or the anti-hero. And now, when I look at incel channels, you know, I've read some stuff on incel channels, and some of it, you know, I've read a couple of guys on Reddit, and their posts are quite almost beautiful. Their posts are sort of poetic, and it's all that same stuff. It's all this same stuff about, you know, I am unlovable, I am, you know, and they almost refer to themselves, the band of incels, as, you know, we are apart from other men because we are not afforded the pleasures that other normal men are afforded. We are almost like a subspecies within the human race because the Chads are getting all of the, you know, the sexual pleasure and the romantic pleasure and the affection of women, and we are cruelly spat upon and disdained. And it's almost because, I mean, some people, yeah, sure, they're saying it's, and that's really unfair. And, I don't know, they blame society and things, but others are sort of, you know, they almost want to take on this mythical status. They say there's something inherently wrong with them that has put them into this situation, has something inherently wrong with them internally, something almost spiritually bankrupt about them that has meant that women despise them. And as a result, they are ostracized from society. This is what they believe, or this is the subtext to what they believe. And it's very sad that people think that way about themselves, as it was very sad that I thought about myself in that way. But there's also quite a lot of self-aggrandizement going on in that type of thinking. Okay, because it's again, I can only speak for myself, right? So when I was saying those kinds of things to myself and maybe writing those kinds of things in my journals or whatever, I looking back on it now, I can see that of course I was upset, I was emotionally damaged by some of these events, not least because it came off the back of certain family events which perhaps precipitated the way that I engaged with girls, but that's for another show. I was somewhat self-aggrandizing. I was creating a character that was sort of separate to myself, so that I could sort of wallow in self-pity, and that's what it comes down to. And again, I'll refer to 12-step recovery and addiction and all that stuff because I think it's sort of relevant here. Oftentimes, I'll be in a meeting for 12-step recovery, for alcohol, and somebody will say something like, "Well, my first drug was self-pity," or "My first drug was actually fantasy." And that probably sounds weird. I mean, say somebody's a heroin addict and they'll sit there in the meeting and they'll say, "My first drug was self-pity." And you think, well, what does that mean? Like self-pity's that's not a drug. What are you talking about? Do you mean cannabis or something? Or, white lightning or whatever? But I understand what they mean, and perhaps you can understand what they mean as well. What this self-pity, extreme self-pity, and sort of wallowing in self-pity, it takes you away from yourself, right? It takes you out of yourself. And I'm still vulnerable to this now, to be honest. I'm aware of it now. I understand it now. I know how to get out of it now. Which is, I mean, we'll go into some of the techniques later, but I mean, basically talking to other people, basically helping other people, right-sizing your problems, right-sizing this problem of can I get laid or not, but I still quite like it. There are still times when I will sit alone in cafes listening to sad music, thinking about how tragic some of the events in my life have been. And it's all a mental game, and it's all bullshit, really. You understand what I mean? It's all an attempt. We all want to feel important, right? We all want to feel significant in some way. And one of the easiest ways to feel significant, a shortcut to feeling significant, to feeling important in ourselves, is through having sex. A shortcut to validation is having an attractive girl be attracted to you and want to have sex with you and want to date you and everything else. And we all know that, because it gets talked about. This gets thrown at me a lot on Twitter. They'll say, "Oh, the only reason you've done all this dating stuff is for female validation." And in a way, they're right. I mean, of course, there is an element of that. There are other elements as well, which tend to get played down because it doesn't suit their narrative. But yeah, I mean, female validation, getting into relationships, that gives you a byproduct of that, and a very pleasurable byproduct of that is validation. Great. But if you're not dating, you can also get a twisted, weird sort of validation from the fact that you're not dating, because then you can create a story around that. So instead of the story you tell yourself where you're like, I'm the famous, and this is something else I've done in my life. You tell yourself the story. I'm the international playboy, and I've got a girl in every port, and I travel the world, and all of these really beautiful girls who are younger than me find me attractive, and aren't I great? That's a story you can tell yourself, and that makes you feel good. But another story you can tell yourself is, I am bereft, I am unlovable, as Morrissey would say. I am subhuman. I am part of this subspecies. I will never be happy because I failed to meet the minimum requirements that the human race has for those that it selects to procreate. And you can tell yourself that story, and that's terrible, clearly. But it's also kind of, it can also make you feel kind of good. It also kind of make you feel sort of a little bit cozy inside, because you think, oh, poor me, oh, and you can actually sort of get off on self-pity, which is why people will say self-pity was my first drug, because it's a way, all of this stuff, the self-pity and also the validation from dating girls, as well as things like drugs and drink and everything else, all of this stuff are ways to take you away from yourself. Because a lot of us, and well, I'll speak for myself, myself when I was younger, I didn't like myself very much. I didn't like being myself. And so I would look for ways to get out of myself. And when I got older, those ways became more chemical. So it became alcohol, and then it became drugs, and it became various other behaviors like sex, travel, spending money, doing some crazy shit, all of these things. But at the beginning, it was based around fantasy, and the fantasy either that I'm an amazing international playboy, or the fantasy that I am a subhuman, worthless human being who is sort of somehow has the mark of Cain on his forehead, and is sort of has been pushed out of the tribe by humanity, is also a story that you tell yourself, and it wasn't even a true story. This is the stupid thing. As I said, for me, it's even more ridiculous, because when I look back, as I said, there were girls who were interested in me. There were girls who wanted to date me, and it was me that had actually rejected them. But it suited my narrative. It suited my sort of defense mechanism, if you like, or the way that I wanted to negotiate the world. It suited that for me to tell this story about myself instead, that I was this somehow unique character who uniquely, amongst all the people in my school or my college, was marked out as being separate to everyone else, different. And that kind of, and I say it's twisted, it's weird, but it kind of makes you feel. It can kind of make you feel special. Now, bringing all of that back to incels. If there are incels watching this now, I'm sure there are people who would watch that and say, well, that's bollocks. That may have been the case for you, but for me, it's different because X, Y, Z. Actually, I am an incel, and I can't, for these reasons, this is why, and I'm not going to be able to, I can't get a girlfriend and whatever. Well, fine. I mean, I don't know. I don't know your circumstances. I don't know your specific situation. Again, all I can really share is my own experience. So that's what I'll do. So there was that period at school. And then I went to university in Manchester, which is in the north of England, big party city. It was kind of in the heyday of house music, I suppose, clubbing, people taking ecstasy, all that kind of stuff. Manchester was a very cool city at that time, actually. I mean, I suppose it kind of still is, but at the time it was really famous. A lot of bands had come from there, New Order, Smiths, Take That, DJs. I mean, loads of, it was culturally, it was a really exciting place, and I ended up there. And I got completely submerged in the whole sort of nightclub scene, in the whole partying scene, drinking, and it was a crazy time. It was a crazy time for me. And it was I spent about a decade in Manchester, and it was in Manchester I did, most of my, drinking and stuff like that. I don't drink anymore. 12-step recovery, as I said. But yeah, it was a pretty debauched time for me, if you like. But for the first couple of years, I still didn't meet anybody. I still didn't have sex with anybody. And so I prolonged again this notion, this narrative of myself as being the incel, as being the outsider, the person it was never going to happen for. And at this point, sort of between about 18 and 20, it was a bit more true in a way. I don't recall. And this is where it became a bit difficult, because the idea is, in Britain at least, that you go away to university and suddenly you're free from your parents and the strictures of home and everything, and it's meant to be this wild party. and everyone's there. Oh, you always get laid, you know, when you first go to university, freshers week, blah blah blah. For me, it didn't happen, and the reason it didn't happen, I think, was because I, by this time, had started to get into kind of clinical depression, I think, really, and that was related, I would say, to other things. I mean, I don't know how kind of everything interrelates, but certainly I got into quite a dark place mentally, and what that meant was that I isolated a lot. So when I was first at university, I really isolated. I wasn't social at all. I didn't integrate well. I'd moved to a different city that I didn't know. The part of Manchester that I lived in was pretty grim at that time. Actually, all of Manchester was pretty grim at that time. It was, you know, we have this big like north-south divide in the UK. The north and the south felt very different. It was all really unfamiliar. And on top of that, I had the issues that I'd suffered, you know, some family stuff that had happened as a kid. And all of this negative, you know, this negative narrative that I've been telling myself. So I had all of this stuff piling on top of me, and I went into quite a dark place. And as I say, really, that meant that I was quite isolated, and I didn't. It wasn't like at college or at school where there were, you know, you had a class and there were people around you, and you know, naturally some girls were attracted to me. At this point, it was literally I was sitting in my bedroom. Yeah, not really meeting anybody, and that led to the spiral of depression going down and down and down. I'll just have a look at the comments here. Actually, a type of vulnerable narcissism. I think that's what you describe. It's interesting to say that, actually, because I think you're right, and that's by Antgios. I think there was a lot of narcissism actually in my position, which is interesting because, in a sense, when you looked at me, I would always say to people would talk about low self-esteem, and I would say, I don't have low self-esteem. I have zero self-esteem. I hate myself. It's not even like low self-esteem. It's like my self-esteem is non-existent. It's in negative figures. But really, as I say, when you take a step back and you look at it, what I was doing was painting a narrative of myself where I became sort of the hero or the anti-hero in this kind of twisted way. I think that's why I related to the Joker film so much, because you kind of see it in Joker, don't you? Where you've got this guy who is probably an incel, an outcast, somebody who feels himself to be downtrodden, but he becomes the hero at the end. And I found that really powerful. I know a lot of people did. And I think it's perhaps for this reason, because narcissism, we assume, is a dude walking around in a Gucci suit going, hey guys, I'm fucking awesome. But actually, you can also have a kind of an inverse or shadow narcissism, I suppose, where you are narcissistic about the fact that you are less than, which is another sort of recovery type word. You can be narcissistic about the fact that you are less than other people. There's another thing actually they talk about in 12-step meetings, 12-step recovery meetings, which is having an extremely big ego and very low self-esteem. And I think that's kind of what I had. I really identify with that. I had exceptionally low self-esteem, but a really, really big ego. And what that means, that puts you in a really odd position, because what that means is you simultaneously feel worse than everyone else and better than everyone else at the same time. And that's something that I have, again, suffered with, or, you know, that's been an element of my personality for all of my life. And I think the whole, and again, I'm only speaking from my own experience here, but I think the whole sort of, for me anyway, the whole I am an incel thing, it was a bit of a performance, even though it was only in my own head and occasionally to friends that I talked to about it. It was a little bit of a performance. It was playing a role, because it seems, how do I explain this? Is this going to make sense to anybody? It seems preferable to be outstanding as a reject than to be mediocre as just one of the herd. Okay, so rather than just say, okay, well, this girl Ellie, she wasn't interested in me at school, you know, in my class, I guess I'm just a bit of a regular guy. I guess I'm just, I guess I'm just one of the crowds. I'm not the best looking dude in school. I'm not the richest or the, whatever. I guess I'm just an ordinary guy. Better luck next time. You can say that, but that then paints you as mediocre. I preferred, because of my narcissism, probably, to say, this girl Ellie doesn't like me in school, and therefore that means I am the Dark Lord of the Night, who will never find human love, or something like that. So yes, I think it's an inverse form of narcissism for sure. Dark Byronic Hero, I like the name. You're trying to teach men healthy narcissism. My mother had unhealthy narcissism and thought she was a goddess and ruined my childhood. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to say about that, really. I mean, it's interesting because I have talked about narcissism in the past, and I've sort of argued quite strongly that actually narcissism is something we should try to develop because it's attractive to others, and it's particularly attractive to girls. And I think that's true. I think it's true that if you're a narcissistic asshole, you're just more attractive to girls and to other people than if you are a mediocre dude who accepts his place in the pecking order. But that's not to say that narcissism is a good thing, or that serious narcissism is something to, or clinical narcissism, or whatever, if you want to call it that, is something to aspire to, because clearly it's not. It can be very damaging. But then but then players, but then classic, Casanova, Don Juan. If you look at that film, not Dangerous Liaisons, Cruel Intentions, there's a sort of a darkness, there's a sort of a destructive element in the classic seducer. So where everybody has to find a place to sit, if you like, is where you are on the continuum. Are you prepared to sacrifice ethics for the goal of being seen as attractive to others, or is that abhorrent to you, and so therefore you're going to eschew narcissism in all of its forms? And that's something that we all have to sort of weigh up for ourselves, and as we examine our behavior. I mean, certainly recovery from addiction is really a lot about breaking down the ego, because addicts tend to, as I said, to have extremely big egos. And one of the things that you're taught when you go into rehab, when you go into recovery, is that you need to kill the ego, because the ego in the end is not doing you any favor. The ego in the end erodes your soul. And I when I say ego, I mean thinking that you're self-aggrandizement, let's say, or narcissism. In the end, it erodes your soul. But that's not to say that it doesn't give you cash and prizes along the way, because it can do. When you look at people who become famous, for example, they tend to be narcissistic. They do very well out of it. People who are narcissistic do really, really well. They get money, they get sex, they get acclaim, they get recognition, they get the best tables in the restaurants, all of these things. They get lots of good stuff out of it, but what's it doing inside? What's it doing to their soul? And this, my friends, is something that, it's a line that I still have to straddle today. It's something that I struggle with, because obviously in some senses I'm still very narcissistic, and I've written books and articles about being narcissistic. I've extolled it, and yet when I go into the recovery meeting, everyone's saying to me, "You've got to lose the ego. You've got to be humble. You've got to be a worker amongst workers. You've got to be a regular guy." And I can see both sides. I can see the benefits of both sides. If you look at someone like Russell Brand, it's a really interesting case study with Russell Brand, actually, because he was somebody who was incredibly narcissistic, incredibly egotistical. And he, probably still is to an extent. But when you look at his current stuff, I don't know if anybody follows him on Instagram, but now I think since he's had a kid, certainly, and got married and sort of settled down a bit, he's definitely mellowed. And it's all about, now he's sort of very, he's much more humble than he was, and it's all about sort of like letting go of the ego, and letting spirituality come into one's life instead. And ultimately, is that the healthier way to live? Yeah, sure. But did Donald Trump get there by killing the ego? There are things that are effective in life that aren't necessarily good for us on a soul level, if you like. Anyway, look, I've run slightly off the topic of inceldom, so let's try and put it back in. But have a look at the comments. You're trying to teach me. That's why I said unhealthy versus healthy. Yeah, unhealthy narcissism, you pick some random person, go out of your way to destroy their life. Healthy narcissism is you have a belief you're awesome, but you don't hurt innocent random people. Yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing, right? I did that book, How to Be an Arsehole, where I talked about dark triad characteristics, and I still find all of that stuff really fascinating. Robert Greene remains one of my favorite writers. I love 48 Laws of Power. I've just read Seduction again. I love Seduction. I love Machiavelli. I love all of that idea of sort of having to bend the rules, doing things that are maybe slightly underhand in order to get where you want to get to. I love all of that stuff. I'm a sucker for all of that stuff. But at the same time, I would never counsel anybody who engages with my content to hurt innocent people. And actually, you should do everything possible that you can to treat other people around you well. At least not to cause deliberate harm to other people, okay? That doesn't mean that you can't bend the rules sometimes. That doesn't mean that you can't put yourself first. Really, I'm all about win-win. As Tom Torero used to say, dating and stuff, it should be win-win. You should both be getting something out of it. Having said that, of course, in reality, that can be tricky. Again, everything is a sort of an ethical decision. We all have to choose our own way. But I would certainly never counsel anybody who watches this or reads any of my stuff to hurt innocent random people, as he said. I think that's not the way you want to go, because ultimately altruism is good for you as well, and it's good for the other person. Troy, use solipsism for self-focus. Narcissism is based on self-presentation of the image. Yes, I agree. I mean, we're getting into semantics a little bit here. I didn't mean to suggest that narcissism was self-actualization, but if it came across like that, sorry, that's not actually what I meant. You're right about tetrad characteristics. I remember the bad boy troublemaker and people with detention always got the prettiest girls behind the bike shed. Well, yes, they do. So what do we do about it? What do we do about that? That seems to be the case, doesn't it? I was talking to my girlfriend about this a couple of days ago, and we talked about bad boys, and I said, well, because she knows about my stuff, and that's been a bit of a bone of contention and with us and everything. But we were talking generally about advice given to guys, and she said, yeah, bad boys are exciting. Bad boys are, so it's definitely true. It's definitely true that women respond to that. So what you have to do, if you're watching this and you're like a stereotypical nice guy, is you have to think, well, okay, what do I do with that information? Do I ignore it? And do I just stay true to my nice guy self? Or do I recognize that maybe I'm not quite as nice as I'm making out to myself and to her? And do I allow my sort of non-nice guy self to come out a little bit? And how far do you let that go? These are all decisions that we all have to make, but I think we need to be aware of the realities of stuff. And yes, I mean, the dark tetrad characteristics are attractive, no doubt. Anyway, trying to bring this back to incels. So then I had those couple of years at university, and I was very down on myself, very depressed, didn't get out very much. And then I took some steps to sort that out, and I got some medical attention. I did some counseling, I did different things, and I sort of got on top of my depression, if you like. And that's important, by the way. If you're suffering medically from depression, then you don't want to be watching videos like this. You don't, you've got to go get that shit sorted out. Go to a doctor, go to a therapist. You need to get right with yourself on a fundamental level, or at least start the process of doing that. So bear that in mind. But anyway, so I sorted out some of this stuff, and also then I was starting to work in bars. I was starting to get more confident, and what really happened for me was for a period of time I took an antidepressant, and what that did was it just blew everything out of the water, because I was taking far too much of it. I was also drinking alcohol with it as well, which you weren't really supposed to do. I was probably doing some other substances as well. And it was a really, really strange thing, right? Because my confidence went from down here, where it had been, and it shot right up to here, pretty much overnight. It took a couple of weeks while the antidepressants, which I've been prescribed, were starting to take effect. And I pretty much shot off the scale. In fact, as I say, I believe that I was prescribed too much of this particular antidepressant, and it was almost like being given cocaine. It was almost like I was flying the whole time. Now, I tell that story not because I recommend that as a course of action for you, but I want to explain what happened, because what it did was it completely changed my mindset within a period of, as I say, a couple of weeks. So I went from being this incredibly, I got a bit more social. I was sort of getting out and about and sort of, engaging a little bit with girls and things. But this blew my head off, and it changed the way that I thought, and it changed the way that I behaved. And I went from being a very self-effacing, fairly quiet, nice guy character to, within that 2-week period, thinking, do you know what? Fuck it. And I use the word "fuck it" advisedly. I might write a book called "Fuck It," because it's quite an important phrase in a way. I just literally thought, "Fuck it, I don't care anymore about my old persona. I don't care about being the bookish introvert. I don't care about being thought intelligent. In fact, I don't want to be thought intelligent. I don't want to be thought the bookish introvert. I don't care about playing by the rules. I don't care about being a good boy. I don't care about any of this stuff. I don't care about being polite to people. I don't care about being socially acceptable." And I was working at a nightclub on the cloakroom, and I just started acting outrageously, really. I just started to sort of take the piss out of people, take the piss out of girls, be cocky, laugh at people, make jokes about people, be rude to people, wear outrageous clothes. I just didn't care anymore. And you know what happened as a result of that? Within about a fortnight's time, I ended up getting a girlfriend. And she wasn't just any girlfriend. She was really, really cute. She was this blonde girl that used to come to the club that I worked at. She would come every week. All the doormen fancied her. She had guys all over her. She was 19, 20. She was, as I say, stunning, long blonde hair. She used to wear cute dresses and heels and stuff. And she liked me. She pretty much came on to me. And it wasn't some big high status thing. I was working on the bloody cloakroom. And we ended up dating. And the doorman at this club were looking at me. I was this skinny little runt, wearing these weird clothes. And they were like, what the fuck? Why is this girl with him? They couldn't get it. And we dated for about 6 months, and then it ended disastrously because I had no idea about relationships and all of that kind of stuff at the time. But yeah, and I lost my V card, and it was all really good. And the reason that happened was because my mindset changed, and this is why, as well. I think mindset. I tell this story, by the way, in some of the books. I think it's in How to Be an Arsehole. So if you haven't read How to Be an Arsehole, you can read more about that story in that book, available on Amazon. But yeah, like things change for me overnight. And this is why I often say that mindset is so important in terms of game, because I didn't know any game at the time. I don't know how much game had really been invented at that point, but certainly I hadn't read anything about it. I hadn't read any books or anything. I looked the same. I didn't go to the gym and like do some kind of like mega lifting program. I didn't, I mean, I changed my clothes up a bit, but I certainly wasn't, I was wearing some pretty fucking outrageous, punky looking type stuff. And I got the girl, I got this really cute girl. And so the reason I tell the story, right, is because what that says to me is that here was somebody who had come from an incel mindset, and suddenly I pulled the cutest girl who goes to this club in a big city in the north of England. So what does that mean about inceldom? Or what does that mean about my inceldom? Because I could have been one of those dudes on Reddit posting those poetic long screeds about how I am, unworthy, unwanted, and I will always be unlovable and all this kind of stuff. I could have been that dude. I could probably have run like a bloody incel forum if such a thing had existed at the time. I could have been a poster boy for it. And yet, a week or so later, I get laid. And I get laid with a really I end up dating a really attractive girl. That's my experience. I mean, I don't know. As I say, I'm sure guys will watch this who identify as incels, and they'll come back and they'll say, "Well, it's all right for you because X, Y, Z." But all I can tell you is that I really, really had that mindset. I really, really thought of myself in that way, and then everything changed for me. And the reason that everything changed for me wasn't because I got surgery and got like an amazing jaw. It wasn't because I got Botox. It wasn't because I went to the gym and I put on 150 pounds or something. It wasn't any of that stuff. It was the fact that I turned into a cocky motherfucker. And that's what changed it. And then, my friends, what happened then was I then became addicted to not being an incel. Because as soon as I finished dating that girl, we split up about 6 months later. I was devastated. It was a really tough breakup for me. And then I got back on the horse, so to speak, and I met somebody else who was also very cute, and we started dating. And ever since then, I suppose dating, if you like, and sort of being sexually active became my addiction. And it became something that and some people are right, it became something that I got validation from for a long period of time. And then I got into, and I managed to become quite good with socially and meeting girls and attracting girls and things like this when I was in Manchester. And then when I came to London, I discovered the whole space of game and everything else. And the rest is history, really. So what am I saying to wrap this up? Am I saying that every incel can go on to become somebody who writes pickup books? No, I'm not really saying that. Am I saying that incelness is fake, that it doesn't exist? No, I don't think I'm really saying that, because I think that there are people who have a very, very tough time of it. I think there are people who really, really struggle with this stuff and who find it hard to get acceptance in the sexual marketplace, who find it hard to find people who are attracted to them. However, sorry, I just got to check this message because, however, I also suspect that there are people who just really haven't put themselves out there enough, or haven't risked enough socially to be certain that they are actually an incel. This is something that's involuntary, and there's nothing that can be done about it. And by the way, I don't believe that nothing can be done for anybody, because there's lots and lots of different things that you can do to improve your sexual market value, including moving to a different place. As we all now know, there are, just because your local market isn't particularly good, that doesn't mean that you can't move somewhere else, and maybe you'll find, there are billions of people on the planet. I'm not saying there's someone for everyone in a cliched way, but I certainly think there's a hell of a lot of opportunities out there. Let's put it that way. I think you need to be careful if you're going to buy into this incel label. And you really need to try and be honest with yourself. Have you really, really pushed it in terms of trying to attract a partner? Or have you just been rejected a couple of times or not got many matches on Tinder, and now you're calling yourself an incel because there's a community and it absolves you from responsibility? I'm not saying that's the case for everybody at all. Don't think that. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying that I think everybody needs to think carefully about it, because my experience was, actually looking back, I wasn't celibate involuntarily. I was actually celibate voluntarily. And when I made the decision to break out of that, then things changed for me quite significantly. I hope that makes sense. That's just, I don't know, that's just my take on it anyway. I know people will disagree. Do leave your comments. Please do subscribe to this channel so that you get notifications when the new videos come up. Do join my daily email list, link below. Do get Renegade Dating Playbook, my 10-book dating advice compendium, if you like, including How to Be an Arsehole, which we talked about, Still in the Game, 7 Laws of Seduction, Text Game Mastery, etc., etc. It's only $39. It's going to be discontinued at the end of the year, but you can still get it now. Link below. Yeah, and join me again for another video very soon. I'll see you later. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.